Good evening. My name's Tyrone Langert, and today I would like to talk about Doug Ford and his performance as Ontario Premier. So far he has made good on his promise to scrap the cap and trade, which is a system in Ontario which has done nothing but prop up green energy at the expense of taxpayers. Now, the idea of the cap and trade was for Kathleen Wynne and the Liberals in the Ontario NDP to use the funds gathered from the cap and trade to fund public expenditures. Now, the problem with this is that it ties bad policy to what the Ontario people deem as a necessity. So, for example, public education, there was $100 million worth of school repairs that everyone wanted to be done, but because Doug Ford scrapped the cap and trade system, now that $100 million is no longer allocated to that. So the left-wing news press has deemed that as Doug Ford eyeing the $1 million for school repairs for public schools and simply taking it away. Well, that's not entirely true. The fact is that cap and trade does not actually punish polluters if they have enough money. It only punishes businesses that can't afford to pay those penalties or to purchase carbon credits. And it is one of these weird things where, coupled with the carbon tax, coupled with the hydro rates, it has made, among other things, it has made the cost of living in Ontario completely unbearable. And you saw that during the last election. Andrea Horwath was trying to come across as a more radical alternative to Kathleen Wynne. So if you felt that Kathleen Wynne was not nearly radical enough, that her policies were milquetoast at best, and did not actually solve any problems because she just wasn't far left enough, well then Andrea Horwath would have been your pick. It was amazing to see how many young people, how many students were out in full force online, not in person, online, after the Ontario election was won by Doug Ford, and they were talking about how Doug Ford was going to strip away abortions, going to strip away LGBTQ rights, going to put race relations down the toilet. I mean, those were some really bizarre things that they were saying. Many of those issues that they mentioned, of course, are strictly under the federal jurisdiction. So he wouldn't have been able to do any of those things that the NDP were scaremongering on. Another thing that I'd like to talk about as well is the sex ed curriculum. I mean, evidently, so what happened was that Doug Ford actually reverted the current sex ed curriculum to that of its previous iteration. So sex education is not gone. It was not abolished. It was merely replaced with the same thing it had before. But there's so much scaremongering in the media and in the comment sections of the Globe and Mail that it is a little difficult to parse out what is objective reality and what is sensationalism. But our media has done a very good job of ginning up fears for that. So the left-wingers now are talking about how this is anti-LGBT because you don't learn about the nature of homosexual relationships, how this is really just stupid, because we all know, of course, as Kathleen Wynne says, I'm paraphrasing what she's said in the past, that kids are growing up to become more promiscuous than their forefathers. Which, really, when you look at the makeup of Kathleen Wynne's family, is an indicator of her projecting her more, I guess you could say, sexually libertine lifestyle onto the rest of the Ontario populace, starting with their children, of course. I mean, it wasn't a mistake that, I forget what the name of the bill was, but that Kathleen Wynne did table a bill stating that if parents did not accept their child's gender identity, which presumably is not what their sex, which does not correspond to their sex, would be taken away from their parents. So she's equating the denial of gender identity, which, by the way, it's all in the head. It has nothing to do, virtually nothing to do with what is physically present. It has to do with the head, what is in the head, how you perceive yourself, and that's the extent of it. She equates that to abuse. She equates that to abuse. It's much more, parents want to look out for their children. In general, most parents care about their children. They just they don't need to be nannied by a government that pretends to care about their children. I mean, for goodness sake, who was the deputy education minister or assistant education minister that helped Kathleen Rentable the sex ed curriculum to begin with? Convicted child pornography distributor Ben Levin. Ben Levin is not an angel. Ben Levin is more like a devil. He was caught by the RCMP or by some other police force, Canadian police force, that were undercover posing as people who were kind of on the fence of whether or not to do nasty things to their children, sexual things to their children. And Ben Levin, the role he played, real or fake, almost doesn't matter. The role he played was the person who was trying to encourage that undercover cop who posed as a parent to actually have sexual relations with their children. And he's being let out. He's going to be let out pretty soon, despite this absolute travesty of a human being tabling such a bill. I mean, can you imagine? Our society is now more focused, and this, I think, has happened only recently, in recent years, where society's drifted so far to the left. All we care about now are how you identify, not what you do with your life, not whether you're employed, not whether you have something valuable to offer to the marketplace, which is what employers are looking for, be they on the left or the right. And as a part of a younger generation myself, we're not necessarily providing what they are looking for. And so a lot of us are on the unemployment lines more than ever. Cost of living is rising because we've, not just our younger generation, but society as a whole for many, many years, decades even. We've created a welfare state that is so burdensome, but is so intrusive in our lives that we cannot even imagine a world without it. Not even, let alone a life without it. And so it's no wonder that everyone's all freaking out about Doug Ford. People who didn't vote for him are freaking out about Doug Ford. They're all calling him a dummy, a person who doesn't know anything about finances. Of course, he runs a few businesses still, owns a few businesses. Some, I believe, in Canada, but definitely some in America. So he knows a thing or two about running a business, for sure. Otherwise, they would have fallen bankrupt by now, As the saying goes, a fool and his money soon part. And Doug Ford is no fool. Kathleen Wynne, however, it's a different story altogether. She was a radical teachers' union advocate before she became premier. She was the one who actually signed off on the gas plant scandal. Patrick Brown actually did a very good job of grilling her when that was the case. But this new hysteria with Doug Ford, it is crazy. It is absolutely crazy. Especially when the experts all told us how stupid he was for suggesting that the board of Hydro One couldn't simply be let go, couldn't simply be fired without some heavy repercussions. Yet we haven't really gotten all the details yet of the conditions, but the fact is, the Hydro One board is gone. Alright, for better or worse, whether the severance package for the CEO is $400,000 or a little bit above, even if he is rumored to be entitled to around $8 million, that still saves us the cost of having the entire board there for many years to come. For many, many years to come. It is atrocious, though, that we've come to this point in our lives, in our political lives, where we say, well, if a politician or a bunch of bureaucrats are being inefficient with their money, well, we shouldn't worry about it, because if we told them to shape up, if we told them to cut down on the amount of frivolous taxpayer use of our taxpayers' money, well, then we should, then we just make them unnecessarily angry, if we were to tell them to just stop it. Instead, Doug Ford has enough gusto. He's changed the governmental culture enough. He's got the public sector shaking in their boots enough to actually change the course of Canadian history. Now, of course, this is very early in his term. Remember, folks, we're less than 2 weeks into his governance. It is wild how much he has already accomplished. He's gotten us out of the cap and trade fund, and after he gets us out of that, then we can actually begin to restore fiscal sanity and accountability to our governments in general, our provincial and federal governments. I'm located here in British Columbia, but I see a culture wave happening here. If it can happen in Ontario, when you had one of the most far-left government administrations in Canadian history under Kathleen Wynne, absolutely defeated, absolutely toppled, to the point where they now do not have party status. They're one seat less of obtaining party status. Well, it can also happen here. It can also happen in Left Coast, BC, where we've got John Horgan, who simply kowtows to the Green Movement because he has to in order to stay in power. The salary of a premier is pretty impressive. In lieu of other public sector benefits and wages, it pales in comparison. But on its own, it's very good. It's probably the best that he'll ever get in his life because, honestly, John Horgan is not a very intelligent person. He has convictions, but he's too afraid to follow through on them because we have a Green DP coalition, whereas the NDP have the Greens have 4 seats, and combined with the political power of the NDP, it puts them over the majority line. Slightly. But it just goes to show, even in Ontario, Doug Ford won a majority government. So people do get tired of far-left governance after a certain number of years, which is good. Now, of course, all the lefties are freaking out because they're saying, well, why would Doug Ford take away free lunches for those working in public service at Queen's Park, specifically? Why would he do that to them? Why would he be so cruel as to do that? How vindictive is he? Why is he such a loudmouth? Why doesn't he just shut his mouth? Well, folks, it takes a kind of leader, it takes a tough guy to make such drastic changes, oftentimes without even doing anything, within 11 or 12 days of being in office. It is incredible what he has managed to accomplish simply by his mere presence. Now, of course, Andrea Horwath is just scaremongering at this point, saying, well, Doug Ford is making decisions behind closed doors. Don't you know, during the campaign? This is reminiscent of what he did during the campaign, where he didn't release any numbers. Right, you want to know why he didn't release any numbers? Because Kathleen Wynne was so corrupt that she fudged the numbers. That prior Liberal administrations have also fudged the numbers. And so, Doug Ford, like most thinking Ontarians, do not trust the numbers. Even when the NDP released their political platform, so-called political platform, which just calls for more spending, more free stuff, more free programs, cradle-to-grave welfare state, the Auditor General said the NDP was off by approximately $1 billion on their budget. So their numbers were wrong. In other words, they were wrong. And so when Doug Ford says, look, everyone around me, other parties around me, other members of the left-wing intelligentsia are making mistakes because they are operating on false premises, I am going to find the correct premise. I'm going to find out what the actual financial state of affairs are. And so that is why he's committed to doing independent audits, along with giving more power and room to the Auditor General. Give her more room to maneuver, to audit. which is what her job was. The Liberals have ridiculed the Auditor General's position like no other provincial government has in Canadian history. They just kept pushing her out as a partisan hack. And of course, when it comes election time, of course, they started parading around saying, "Oh, we've fulfilled many of what the auditor implemented many of the Auditor General's requests into our political platform and into our government. We've done many and many of those things." Well, the fact is they screwed the pooch. They were the ones who began this descent into fiscal hell. And so they should own up to it. I forget what the name of the wind project is that Doug Ford recently cancelled, but it's wind. It is wind. Wind energy, sorry to say, is inferior to oil and gas, to fossil fuels in general, even to nuclear. So they, I guess the left in general, were not that upset anyway, about the Ontario gas plant scandal. I'll grant some leeway to the Ontario NDP, to voters of Ontario NDP, because they didn't actually vote for the cancellation of gas plants, as far as I'm aware of. But the Ontario Liberals have no right to be upset about Doug Ford's so-called suddenly cancelling the wind energy project, because it did not begin under him like the Ontario gas plants began under the Liberals. So the Ontario gas plants started under the Liberals, and then they were cancelled by the Liberals. This wind energy project was started by the Liberals and ended by the PCs, Progressive Conservatives. Well, of course, it would be nice for every single government in human history to honor each and every single one of their contracts, but some of them are just not worth following through on because they do so much damage to the fiscal stability of a nation. And for what? What benefit? None of the farmers are happy about it, or virtually none. They want these damn things off their property, or what could be used by them better than the government. There is an ongoing and I should say pernicious assumption that is being paraded around by lefty types in Ontario, which is that you should just trust the government. That the government's always been there for you. That the government should provide free and subsidized abortions, of course. That everything should be subsidized by the government. That you should never have to pay for your own mistakes. And of course, they support mistakes. As in, anytime people make mistakes, I guess it's just fine. Because, well, what about Ben Levin? What about him? It's kind of interesting, too, because the Ontario Liberals and Ontario NDP always go on about how they're anti-discrimination. Anti-discrimination, whatever that even means, right? Because we don't really know what that means, to be anti-discrimination. Because they have an Ontario Human Rights Tribunal, which practically ruins the lives of people who are convicted of hate speech. The social justice tribunals. For hate speech. Isn't that amazing? So, people like Ben Levin can get out of jail after a few years for distributing child porn and getting away with being partially in charge of drafting the sex ed curriculum that Ontario just cast aside and burnt and ripped to shreds and then burnt and then spread its ashes on the political corpse of Kathleen Wynne. He only gets a few years. Of course, he's not allowed to stay around minors anymore, without direct supervision. Of course not. That's kind of a given. That's kind of an order qualifier, not an order winner. This isn't something to be happy about. This is something to expect. It is expected that Ben Levin does his time in jail. It is expected that from henceforth, he is not allowed to interact with minors. What's unexpected to me is why he's out of jail. Pedophiles should not be free to roam around in society. They're predators. These are not people that you let off the hook, especially if they've been caught trying to convince an undercover cop, whom he would have thought of as a real life parent, to do sexual intercourse with their children. Those are not the kinds of people that we want out in society. But Kathleen Wynne did not really make a heavy disavowal. No one challenged her on the campaign trail about it. Also, no one challenged her on the campaign trail for drafting a bill that allows the government, the state, to take away children from their parents, because the idea of the sex ed curriculum was to supposedly make children aware that there are different ways to be sexual. There are different ways of expressing your sexuality, and that all means of expressing your sexuality are fine. Well, frankly, that is not even true, because especially if you're a straight person, and if you try to begin a straight parade, you'll be laughed out of commission. Your whole life could be ruined. So that can't happen. If you were to tell your parents that you were straight, for example, and they said they wouldn't accept you, well, I'm not sure if it would apply or not. But certainly, the bill certainly wasn't meant for those people. Now, that would be an extremely marginal amount of people. But think on this. When the government opens to the mind of a child different possibilities of sexuality, a word that they're not even comfortable with or truly understand until they hit puberty, until they can experience sexual desires, well, then you're just putting ideas into their head. You're putting ideas into their head, and they might think, "Mommy, I think I'm transsexual." And all it would take for a parent is for a parent to say, "No, son," or "No, sweetie, you're not. Alright, you're straight," and that's that. The parent may be right, the parent may be wrong, but the fact is that the Ontario Liberals don't seem to believe in life sentences, or indeed the death penalty, for pedophiles like Ben Levin, who distribute child porn and encourage the facilitation of sexual acts on children, with children. But the moment a parent voices their opinion, their dismay at the sex ed curriculum for instilling stupid ideas into their child that have no bearing on their future success, in fact would perhaps lead to have an adverse effect on their future success, the government would take their children away from them. Parents who actually care about their children and what they're being taught in school. However, deadbeat parents who don't care, maybe they have additional problems too, but they're less. But parents who just don't speak up about these things, they're less likely to have this happen. They'll just say, "Okay, son," or "Okay, honey, sweetie, you can just believe whatever you want. That's fine. That's fine." It's not like your sense of identity determines what you do later on in your life. No, none of that. It's not like it's the job of the parent to instill religious and moral and philosophical values in the kid at a young age on a very basic level, on the way that they interact with people in the world. No, that's not it at all. It's the job of the school to teach values. Don't you see, when kids go home, they just need to be accepted. They just need to be accepted. If a kid does poorly at something, or if a parent believes, with all the conviction that they have, that there's something wrong with their child, or that their child needs help, or that the child is wrong for thinking, for having the wrong idea of their sexuality, if that's what the parent thinks, then they have the right to think so. But not under this liberal government. This is Stalinist Russia-type tactics. This is Hitler Youth type tactics. You cannot strip away children from their parents without just cause, and this is not just cause. This is theft. Above all, this is child abuse. You're going to put them in the adoption system, in the government adoption system? Do people understand how horrible of a life that is? Now, here's hoping, fingers crossed, that Doug Ford repeals these stupid anti-parent, anti-child laws surrounding taking children away from their parents because their parents did not parrot exactly what the school system parrots. This is just absurd. But yet, the experts are focused on talking about Doug Ford's non-existent numbers. As though everyone in the room, in the so-called room, doesn't know already that Doug Ford is trying to figure out what the numbers are because he does not trust liberal numbers. And he has no reason to trust liberal numbers because they always lie. Initially, the Ontario gas plant scandal, as reported by the Ontario Liberals, was in the millions. The millions! And then it finally came out that it was 1.1 billion. Wow. So does anyone else trust those numbers? Should we have the right to question our so-called moral superiors? We should. We should. That's what Doug Ford's doing right now. He's questioned the so-called moral superiors. The people who've essentially found waste. That's what the Hydro One board of directors said. The executive, whatever you want to call it, whatever they're called. They said that they found waste. And that's why they're given pay raises. They're given bonuses. Increased compensation, all of it. Because of all the efficiencies that they have found. And they save taxpayers money, they proclaim. Really? Really? That's why hydro bills keep increasing. And I understand this is not really connected, but that's why gas prices are increasing. Because the green intelligentsia have done such a good job in finding efficiencies. Of course, when Doug Ford pledges to find efficiencies, they're saying, what? You're going to have to cut services! Well, if it's a wasteful service, first of all, it should be cut. Second, he didn't say anything about cutting services. And so we do not know yet. In fact, I would even say that Doug Ford probably does not know exactly what he's going to do. And that is okay. At this point, that is okay, because the Kathleen Wynne Liberals have lowered the bar for successive governments, henceforth. On matters of accountability, on matters of jurisprudence, on matters of being ethical and honest, and transparent. See, one thing folks have to remember as well is that Kathleen Wynne has a track record of being a dishonest liar, of being an absolute hag to the people around her, to the people who counted on her the most. Various parents' rights groups, were outraged when the sex ed curriculum came to pass without their consultation. Like, it was in the talks, and Kathleen Wynne publicized that she was meeting with parents' rights groups to discuss the specifics of the now cast aside sex ed curriculum. It never happened. See, they met, but Kathleen Wynne only put on the pretense of listening to them. She just sat with her arms crossed and really never said a thing. She wouldn't budge. She'd just say, listen, you guys are all backwards people. Not exact words, but just paraphrasing what she thought in her mind during that time. The kind of attitude that she gave to parents who were genuinely concerned about the state of their children, simply just waving them off. Saying, listen, you guys are just backwards Neanderthals. Many of whom were, by the way, immigrants. The people that she purports to care for. But of course, immigrants own businesses too, Immigrants also would like to see their gas prices and their hydro bills lowered. That is what Doug Ford addressed. Immigrant, native-born, doesn't matter. Sex, sexual orientation, race, doesn't matter. What matters is your willingness to see costs go down, corruption go down, accountability go up, transparency go up, fiscal sanity return to the province of Ontario, more jobs for the youth, and more, better take-home pay for the middle class, everyone. You're not going to get that with the Liberals. You never will. Right? Say it here and now. You never will. Their culture of pomposity and corruption will never change. Take it to the bank. It is so ridiculous. And the Ontario people have been fed these lies for so long, but finally they've revolted. They've revolted against the disgusting encroachment on their rights by the Wynne Liberals. They've revolted against the perpetual lies about the true fiscal state of Ontario. They've revolted against a government that attacked the Auditor General, a neutral party, at every single turn. They've revolted against the Green Energy Act, which just stripped them of more than just their money, their hard-earned money. It has stripped them of their dignity. Under the Liberals, coal plants were shut down. They were simply just shut down. Of course, they'll say, oh, we phased it out. We tried to be moderate. We tried to not be so NDP-like. We just wanted to play middle down the road, and because the problem of climate change should be nonpartisan, and the backwards conservatives are not willing to see it, we just got to do something about it, and we did. We shut we didn't create jobs for anyone. We shut those coal mines and coal plants and all that down. We put them out of work. That's how we create jobs in Ontario. We put people out of work, and then we hope that they'll find work in other areas. And if they don't, like your regular run-of-the-mill working class type, if they don't manage to find an occupation outside of what they've been trained for, then just good luck to them. We don't care. We're the Kathleen Wynne Liberals. But we'll say we'll care during election time, of course. We'll also pretend to reduce your hydro bills. We'll postpone the increases in your hydro rates until after the election. That's what they were planning. That's exactly what they were planning. And Andrea Horwath was trying to berate Ford, despite trying to act as a maverick, as a left-wing maverick, who was down the middle. Of course, she proposed a cradle-to-grave welfare state, which is anything but down the middle. But she was supposedly temperamentally down the middle. Oh, so she's a moderate in that respect. Yeah, it counts for nothing. Counts for nothing because she supported the exact same government policies as Kathleen Wynne, except she wanted Kathleen Wynne to double down on all the big government stuff. So if you're an idiot who believes that, like Andrea Horwath is, that, you should simply use the government's power to grant your every wish, then you'd fit right in with the Ontario NDP. You'd fit right in fact, with the BC NDP here out west. But yep, the throne speech, as the leftist media portrayed it, did not have enough numbers featured. Did not have enough numbers in it. Well, that's a trivial matter compared to the amount of stuff that he has to fix. We won't get the numbers until he does an audit. We won't get proper time frames until he gets them fixed. The financial state of Ontario. He'll have a tough road ahead of him, but you know what? He can do it. He's the man for the job. The Ontario population decided that resoundingly. And of course, on election night, Andrea Horwath was ecstatic because apparently this is the best that she's ever done electorally as the leader of the Ontario NDP. But it counts for nothing because she didn't win government. It is funny too because looking at the throne speech, it was infuriating to watch because oftentimes the French in the recording in the live stream I was watching on Facebook was much louder than the English, and so it was difficult listening to two voices speak at the same time. I understand that this is a bilingual country, and I have no problem with that. My issue is mainly that there weren't two available options, which is one version of the stream for English speakers and one version of the stream for French speakers. It would have been so much better that way. Yet I do foresee there being many more things to come in future days. And Ontario does have a bright future ahead of it with Doug Ford as their leader. That's all for this evening. Thank you. Have a wonderful night.